Hello and welcome to the very first lesson of our first module in this Financial Modeling Fundamentals course. If you are brand new to financial modeling or you just signed up for the course and you want to go through everything sequentially from beginning to end, this is the lesson that you should be starting with. Now, if you have more experience and you're looking for coverage of specific topics or you just want to go through and fill in the gaps in your knowledge, you should probably skip past this entire module and certainly this lesson because you probably already know what financial modeling is. This one is really for you if you're brand new to this, you don't have much experience, you haven't used Excel that much before, you don't know that much about accounting or how to value companies or other topics like that. So we're going to start off here with an overview of financial modeling, do a real world analogy so you understand what it means and how you use it, and then we'll go through a few of the finer points that a lot of people overlook and tend to gloss over when it comes to financial modeling. So if you do a Google search for this term, or you look online or in books, you'll see a lot of definitions about what it means. Many of these definitions are filled with numbers and technical terms. I want to take a step back and define financial modeling a little bit differently. Instead of jumping into the numbers and the math and the technical terms, I would define financial modeling as telling a story with numbers. And to explain precisely what this means, we're going to go through an example of a story or a movie that I hope everyone watching this is familiar with. Because just like in movies, TV shows, or books, you have many of the same elements with financial modeling. It's just that the ultimate purpose of it and some of the specifics are different, but you still have the same basic elements. Just like movies, TV shows, or books have a protagonist, an antagonist, a conflict, a struggle, and a resolution, it's the same thing here, except you're doing it in Excel, in Word, and in PowerPoint instead. So the protagonist, of course, is essential to any story. It's the main character you're following, the one who's going to change over time. And then equally essential is the antagonist, the villain, the one who prevents the hero from achieving his goal. So with financial modeling, typically the protagonist is going to be the company or the asset or the investment that you're following, and the antagonist will be the people who are saying that you're wrong about it, or the opinion that perhaps your own views on it are wrong. And then there's the conflict. So the protagonist and antagonist run into each other and they get into a conflict, and often this is what you're sorting out when you're completing this process. You're trying to figure out who is correct about this company or this opportunity. And then there's some type of struggle. So not only do you get into a conflict, but it evolves past that. And here, of course, we see X-Wings and TIE fighters battling each other over the Death Star. With financial modeling, it's not quite this dramatic or action-packed because you're really doing this in Excel. So a little bit less exciting, we could say. But it's still the same idea where you have this conflict, you have different views about how a company should be viewed by the market, and instead of just leaving it at that and just arguing about it back and forth, you want to go to the numbers. And you want to say, based on the numbers, what do we think about this? Which side is right and which side is going to prevail in this conflict? And then finally, at the end, you have the resolution. So again, here, very dramatic. We have a giant space station blowing up and then a bunch of our characters in the movie receiving awards at the end and saving the galaxy, at least temporarily, until the sequel. With financial modeling, it works a little bit differently here, and the resolution is not so much about the heroes prevailing in the end, but about which side was correct. Because unlike in most movies or TV shows, we don't know for a fact that the protagonist is always going to prevail. It might be the type of movie, and there are some out there, where the villain actually wins, or perhaps no one wins. Perhaps some third-party force comes in and then they actually prevail in the end. So it's a little bit different, but that's the framework that I would urge you to use when you think about this. Now, of course, as I've been alluding to, with financial modeling as opposed to storytelling, you are dealing with companies or projects or investments rather than people. So maybe you've been following a company in the stock market that you're thinking about investing in, and you don't know whether or not it's a good investment. You don't know whether or not the company's stock price will increase, but you can use financial modeling to go through the company's story and to quantify everything about it and to make that type of decision. Or maybe you're working at a company and they're trying to decide whether to construct a new theme park or a new store in a certain location. You don't know whether or not it's really a good idea, so you have to figure out the story behind it, and then you have to quantify it with the numbers, and then come to a conclusion and resolve that story at the end. As I said before, the resolution is one of those parts that is different when it comes to financial modeling versus telling a story. Because here it's more about what you think versus what everyone else thinks, or what perhaps a key person opposing your plan or opposing your ideas thinks. And then, of course, another difference is that usually there's a way to tell whether or not your view was correct in the end. It may not be immediately obvious. It may take a very long time to realize this. But for example, if you recommend investing in a company and its share price rises to the amount that you predicted, then it seems like your view was correct in the end. And that would be the resolution there. So there are some differences here, but I would still strongly encourage you to use that storytelling framework and to always think about it like that when you go into this type of exercise. So here's an example of how you might use financial modeling to make it a little more concrete and to ground it with an actual example we'll go through later in the course. So here, the protagonist, our hero, you could say, is this company Jazz Pharmaceuticals. The problem, really the antagonist here, is what the market as a whole has thought about the company. At the time of this case study, its stock price had increased a lot, as you can see from the first part of this graph. The specific numbers don't really matter that much right now. So its stock price had increased a lot, but then recently there had been quite a sell-off and it had fallen to around $130 per share. So for some reason, the market had adjusted its views of this company and said, you know what, we don't think it's actually worth as much as it ran up to. We think it's actually worth less than that. Here is the conflict here. Is this recent drop justified? If so, maybe we should stay away from the company for now, because maybe it's worth exactly what it should be worth. On the other hand, if the recent drop is not justified, then maybe it's worth more than that $130 per share price. Maybe it should actually be worth a number that is much greater than that, or maybe a number that's a little bit greater than that. And so that's the conflict that we are trying to resolve with this type of case study. This one is definitely more focused on you as an investor making these decisions. Of course, we also have case studies that are more focused on what investment bankers advising companies do. So they're not investing their own money directly, they're just advising companies on their options. We also have some case studies devoted to that, but I think it's a little bit easier to understand this concept if you think about this invest versus no invest decision in a public company like this. So the struggle here is that now we need to go beyond the conflict and we need to get more specific. So the market thinks one way about this pharmaceutical company's prices and unit sales, and we think another way. Specifically, we think that the market is greatly underestimating how much the company can raise its prices by, and also how much it can ultimately sell. So that's the struggle. And in a movie, this is typically resolved by having people fight each other, or having the character come out at the end and reveal some new secret move that no one knew about before, and then they triumph in the end, or they triumph but there are serious consequences, or something like that. With financial modeling, though, this is the part where you actually jump in and quantify it. And you say, what is the impact? If we really think that product prices and unit sales are going to increase by more than anyone expects, what is the ultimate impact here? And the way we do this, I'll just jump into Excel now. This is a more complex model, so don't worry about it too much. But at a basic level, what we do is we go in and say, right now, maybe this company is charging around $60,000 per year for their very, very specialized pharmaceutical product. We think that by the end of this 5 or 10 year period or whatever it is, they can actually increase prices to more like $120,000, which is double that. Now, you could have that argument and you could go back and forth about it, but the important point is that with financial modeling, you can quantify that. And you can say, okay, let's say that they really do increase their prices by that much. what is the impact on the company's share price? How much should they be worth? And maybe the answer here is that they should be worth closer to $200 per share, as we found in our analysis. Now, there are a lot of steps in between this. Obviously, it's not just as simple as plugging in an assumption for the company's sales or for their prices and then getting to an implied share price at the end. There are a lot of intermediate steps, but at a high level, that's really what we're doing here. So we're really quantifying the impact. We have this narrative, and we believe that everyone else is wrong about some key features of the company. And then through Excel and financial modeling, we quantify that. And we say, as a result of this difference, and as a result of the fact that everyone else is wrong and we're correct, we think the company is actually going to be worth $200 per share, and that it's worth a lot more than $130 per share. And maybe by investing in it, we can actually make money. So this resolution at the end, it's really what I just said, that ultimately, as a result of all this analysis and as a result of the story we believe about the company, we think it's actually worth more like $200 per share, not $130 per share. And if you're curious, in real life, actually, in roughly the 6 months after this, it increased to around $170 per share. So maybe we weren't entirely correct, but we were in the right ballpark. We were right that the company was worth more than what the market attributed to it. So we were largely right about this, even though maybe we weren't exactly right on the specific numbers. And that is really the point of financial modeling. You come up with a story for this company, you figure out how it's different qualitatively from what everyone else thinks, then you quantify those assumptions using Excel and financial modeling to figure out what it might really be worth, and then figure out if you could make money with this somehow. Now, there are some other differences if you compare this to storytelling. One of the main ones is that with stories, movies, TV shows, books, they're typically designed to entertain you or to move you emotionally in some way or to teach you something new. With financial modeling, though, there are really two purposes that I would point to. Number one is you want to be able to make the correct investment decision and then make money as a result of that. So going back to that example we just gave with Jazz Pharmaceuticals, that is an example of this type of purpose. We're trying to make an investment decision. Do we buy this company's stock or do we not buy it? Or do we sell this company's stock or do we not sell it? So that's one of the main purposes of financial modeling. And then the second one is if you're not in a role where you're investing your money directly, maybe you're just advising clients or potential clients. So a client like Joseph A. Bank here, one of the other companies we'll look at in our case studies, this is a men's retailer based in the US. They've received an offer from a larger competitor, Men's Warehouse, and they want your advice to decide whether or not they should accept the offer or not accept the offer. And if they should not accept the offer, what else they should do? Should they go approach other companies? Should they go and try to acquire a smaller company? With financial modeling, you can give them answers to those questions. Now, there's more to it than that. It's not just about the numbers. There are qualitative factors, there are market factors, but at a basic level, that is what you're doing. You're using the numbers to help your client reach the correct decision on what they could do and hopefully get a deal done if it makes sense, or if a deal doesn't make sense, to help them avoid making a stupid decision and doing a deal that is going to hurt them in the end. Now, there are a couple points about financial modeling that a lot of people overlook or don't really get correct, and there are a lot of misconceptions about it as well. Going back to the point I made before about if you look at this topic online, you find, in my opinion, what is a lot of confusing and misleading information that doesn't make it clear exactly how you use this. The first thing is that modeling is much more art than science. You'll see a lot of people online who go in and have these very complex models and have these Excel spreadsheets that are massively complicated, but the truth is that there's very rarely a correct answer. In hindsight, you can come to correct answers sometimes because you can look at investments or you can look at acquisitions of companies and you can say that was clearly correct or that was clearly not a good idea. We shouldn't have done that. But if you're looking forward, you're trying to project the future. You're trying to predict what's going to happen and say, in 5 years, I think this company is going to look like this, or I think this market's going to look like this. And no one can ever really predict the future. So there's a lot of speculation that's involved, and there's no clearly correct way to say, yes, I know exactly what's going to happen in 2 years from now, because no one really does. And then, even beyond that, even going into some of the numbers themselves, it's not as if you can solve an equation and then say, okay, based on my equation, I think this company is going to sell 5,000 units next year. You really don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they'll sell more units than they did this past year, but you don't know. It could always go the other way. And so a lot of this comes down to the story you believe about the company or the investment, and then translating that to numbers, which is very, very subjective. If you're coming into this with a background in math or engineering or physics or chemistry, you need to understand up front that this is not one of those fields. This is not math where you can prove a theorem, or physics where you can look at an equation related to momentum or gravity or special relativity or anything else and then come up with an answer. It's not chemistry where you can look at a chemical reaction and then say, okay, at the end, this compound is going to form. There is a lot of uncertainty here because fundamentally you are predicting the future, which of course no one can ever really do. You might be able to have an equation where you can solve the other side of that equation, but when you're predicting the future, it doesn't really work like that. So it's more about looking at a range of plausible scenarios and a range of plausible outcomes and then making your decision based on that, as opposed to something as specific as solving an equation and getting the exact correct answer. Even with some of the more theoretical concepts that we'll look at in this course, they're typically far less rigorous than the concepts and the theorems and the proofs that you see in a field like math or physics or chemistry, for example. Because with those, you have to go through a specific set of steps to solve an equation or to prove that something is correct and to look at different scenarios and to rigorously prove that other scenarios are false. Here, again, you're predicting the future, so there's no real way to prove it one way or another. And that's what makes it fundamentally different from these fields. Really, financial modeling is a combination of storytelling, because you have to figure out what the story for the company is first, how you view it differently from others, or how you view a company's options differently from what other people might think. And then you have to gather the right data. Notice how there's still no math involved yet, because you're coming up with the story, you're gathering the data, but you're not actually doing any math yourself. And then at the end, you will make some calculations. But really, in our view, the two parts here in the beginning, storytelling and data gathering, are much more important in most cases than those calculations at the end. The calculations tie together everything, and they allow you to present your findings in a neat package. But if you don't have the story right in the beginning, if you get the narrative wrong, or you don't have the right data, garbage in, garbage out. Your calculations are going to be completely useless. And then one final thought I'll leave you with on this note is that it's better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. Before you jump in and say that this quote is not actually from the famous economist on screen, I'm aware that it's often attributed to other people, but this is the best image I could find. Going back to everything I just mentioned, often with financial models, you're not going to be able to answer a question precisely. You won't be able to say, yes, this company is worth exactly $201.93. But what you can say is that this company should be worth more than it is right now. Or this company should be worth a lot less than it is right now. Or it makes sense to construct a store or a theme park in this location. We don't know exactly how much we're going to make, but we think it's going to be in this range, or we think that it's going to be a positive outcome for our business in general. And you're not going to be able to get super specific because of the issue with predicting the future, but you will be able to get roughly right answers. And you have to be really careful with this, because a lot of people jump in and they think that it's all about coming up with formulas that are extremely complicated. And often what this leads to is scenarios where they are very precise and they're also very wrong. So as you go through these lessons, you always want to be thinking about how to get answers that are roughly right as opposed to ones that are precisely wrong. So that's it for our introductory lesson on what financial modeling is. To do a quick recap and summary, we would compare financial modeling to storytelling. You have a protagonist, usually the company or the investment you're following. The antagonist, which might be the overall market and its views of the company or someone who opposes your views. Then you have the conflict. What has happened recently, and should the company be worth more or less than it is right now? Or should a company do a deal or not do a deal? That could be another conflict. Then there's the struggle, because the market or someone else thinks one way, we think another, and we want to quantify that through a financial model. We input our assumptions, they have their assumptions, we think ours are correct, and based on that, we use a model to figure out what we should do. Should we buy the company? Should we sell the company? Should we do a deal and be acquired by another company? Should we acquire another company ourselves? And then at the end, you have your resolution. You have your conclusion based on the output of that. And then in real life, after some time passes, you can see whether or not your conclusions were correct. Coming up next, we're going to be looking at the financial modeling process in more detail. You have an idea at a high level of what the purpose is now, but we want to go into the process and tell you more about what you do to actually get started with this, where you find the information, where you gather data, how you can go into Excel and figure out how to set up your model in the first place, how much outside industry research and analysis you need, and then finally how to put together everything in the end to reach your conclusion, whether it's what to do with your own money or what to advise a client to do with its own money.